The Bible Study Podcast, episode 260. Today, the Bible Study Podcast continues the study of 2 Samuel with chapter 19. Welcome to the Bible Study Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. As you may recall in the story of David in 2 Samuel chapter 18, David's son Absalom, who had rebelled against him, was defeated. This is good news, but David took it hard. This is bad news for him because he was hoping that his son could be spared. He was first of all a father and second of all a king, and so this is not good behavior for a king, although it might be good behavior for a father. 2 Samuel 19, Joab was told, "The king is weeping and mourning for Absalom." And for the whole army, the victory that day was turned into mourning, because on that day the troops heard it said, "The king is grieving for his son." The men stole into the city that day as men steal in who are ashamed when they flee from battle. The king covered his face and cried aloud, "O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son." Then Joab went into the house to the king and said, "Today you have humiliated all your men, who have just saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your wives and concubines. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. I see that you would be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. Now go out and encourage your men. I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This will be worse for you than all the calamities that have come on you from your youth till now." So the king got up and took his seat in the gateway. When the men were told, "The king is sitting in the gateway," they all came before him. Meanwhile, the Israelites had fled to their homes. Joab is a gift to David. It is a gift to have friends who will look us in the face and tell us what needs to be told. Joab isn't telling David this to be mean. He is telling this to David because David needs to hear it. It is the truth. What David has done to his people, to the people who have been faithful to him, is he's turned this time that should be a celebration into a time of mourning. And now they feel bad about what they have done. They feel bad about this victory they have won. And Joab said they're going to go away. You can't keep their loyalty the way you are treating them. And we need friends who will look us in the face. And in this case, this is particularly hard because he is saying this to the king. And so he is speaking truth to power. And this is an important gift. Now, it's not always received well, of course, but David understands that Joab speaks the truth to him. And so he goes out and goes to talk to the people. Verse 9, "Throughout the tribes of Israel, all the people were arguing among themselves, saying, 'The king delivered us from the hand of our enemies. He is the one who rescued us from the hand of the Philistines. But now he has fled the country to escape from Absalom. And Absalom, whom we anointed to rule over us, has died in battle. So why do you say nothing about bringing the king back?' King David sent this message to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. 'Ask the elders of Israel, why should you be the last to bring the king back to his palace, since what is being said throughout Israel had reached the king at his headquarters? You are my relatives, my own flesh and blood. So why should you be the last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, are you not my own flesh and blood? May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you are not the commander of my army for life in place of Joab.' He won over the hearts of the men of Judah so that they were all of one mind. They sent word to the king, 'Return, you and your men.' Then the king returned and went as far as the Jordan. Now the men of Judah had come to Gilgal to go out and meet the king and bring him across the Jordan. Shimei the son of Gera, the Benjamite from Bahurim, hurried down with the men of Judah to meet King David. With him were 1,000 Benjamites, along with Ziba, the steward of Saul's household, and his 15 sons and 20 servants. They rushed to the Jordan where the king was. They crossed at the ford to take the king's household over and to do whatever he wished. When Shimei, son of Gera, crossed the Jordan, he fell prostrate before the king and said to him, 'May my lord not hold me guilty. Do not remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. May the king put it out of his mind, for I your servant know that I have sinned. But today I have have come here as the first from the tribes of Joseph to come down and meet my lord the king." Then Abishai the son of Zeruiah said, "Shouldn't Shimei be put to death for this? He cursed the Lord's anointed." David replied, "What does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? What right do you have to interfere? Should anyone be put to death in Israel today? Don't I know that today I am king over Israel?" So the king said to Shimei, "You shall not die." And the king promised him an oath. Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, also went down to meet the king. He had not taken care of his feet or trimmed his mustache or washed his clothes from the day the king left until the day he returned safely. When he came to Jerusalem to meet the king asked him, "Why didn't you go with me, Mephibosheth?" He said, "My lord the king, since I your servant am lame, I said, I will have my donkey saddled and I will ride on it so I can go with the king. But Ziba, my servant, betrayed me, and he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. My lord the king is like an angel of God, so do whatever you wish. All my grandfather's descendants deserved nothing but death from my lord the king, but you gave your servant a place among those who eat at your table. So what right do I have to make any more appeals to the king?" The king said to him, "Why say more? I order you and Ziba to divide the land." Mephibosheth said to the king, "Let him take everything, now that my lord the king has returned home safely." And so everyone at this point is going out of their way to make friends with the king again. And one of the things we learn here is that Mephibosheth, who is this grandson of Saul, who we thought had betrayed the king, his story is that he had not. And since the day that David has gone away, he has let his hair grow. He has basically been in mourning for David. And so when he comes to greet David, it is quite visible that he has been in mourning for David. And that helps bear the truth of his story, because Ziba had said that Mephibosheth had gone over to the other side, had given his loyalty to Absalom, this one who David had gone out of his way to show favor to, a son of Jonathan, his friend who had died, even though he was the grandson of Saul who had persecuted David. And so it looked like the worst betrayal of all, this one who had become like a son to him. Well, not as bad as the betrayal of his actual son, of course, but now we learn the rest of the story, that maybe Ziba had told David what he had told him to get into the king's favor and to get all of Mephibosheth's land, which is what he actually got. And so now at this point, David says, "We'll divide it between you." He doesn't necessarily have to decide the truth of the story, but he divides the spoils between the two of them, or divides the lands that are owned by the house of Saul between the two of them. Some people, as they are forgiven, like Shimei, other people say, well, shouldn't they die? Shouldn't we show vengeance? And there is a logical, natural need and desire for vengeance. And David, as we've seen, is not one of those people who is a vengeful person. In fact, that got him into trouble at the beginning of this chapter, right? He didn't want vengeance on Absalom. He wanted his throne back, but he wanted Absalom not hurt in the process. And that turned out to be possibly too fine a line to try and tread. But at this point, when the sons of Zeruiah say, well, shouldn't you put Shimei to death? He says, well, what's it to you? I'm the king of Israel now. We all know that. And David is saying he is the king of Shimei as well. He's the king of those who are faithful to him, and he's the king of those who are not faithful to him. And in this way, he hopes to restore peace to Israel. Barzillai the Gileadite also came down from Rogelim to cross the Jordan with the king and to send him on his way from there. Now Barzillai was very old, 80 years of age. He had provided for the king during his stay in Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. The king said to Barzillai, "Cross over with me and stay with me in Jerusalem, and I will provide for you." But Barzillai answered the king, "How many more years will I live, that I should go up to Jerusalem with the king? I am now 80 years old. Can I tell the difference between what is enjoyable and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats and drinks? Can I hear the voices of male and female singers? Why should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? Your servant will cross over the Jordan with the king for a short distance, but why should the king reward me in this way? Let your servant return, that I may die in my own town, near the tomb of my father and mother. But here's your servant Kimham. Let him cross over with the king. Do for him whatever you wish." The king said, "Kimham shall cross over with me, and I will do for him whatever you wish, and anything you desire from me I will do for him." So all the people crossed the Jordan, and the king crossed over. The king kissed Barzillai and bid him farewell, and Barzillai returned to his home. Sometimes when people do you good, they do you good because they think it's the right thing to do. And that seems to be what Barzillai had in mind, is that he did what he did for David because it was the right thing to do and out of love for David. He's 80 years old. He doesn't think that it's going to change his life one way or another that he was faithful to David. He does hold up Kimham and say, you might show your favor on this younger man, whether that is his son, it doesn't say, whether it's somebody he knows. We don't know what the relationship between the two of them are, but he does sort of redirect the king's favor there. When the king crossed over to Gilgal, Kimham crossed with him. All the troops of Judah and half the troops of Israel had taken the king over. Soon all the men of Israel were coming to the king and saying to him, "Why did our brothers, the men of Judah, steal the king away and bring him and his household across the Jordan, together with all his men?" All the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, "We did this because the king is closely related to us. Why are you angry about it? Have we eaten any of the king's provisions? Have we taken anything for ourselves?" Then the men of Israel answered the men of Judah, "We have 10 shares in the king, so that we have a greater claim on David than you have. Why then do you treat us with contempt? Weren't we the first to speak of bringing back our king?" But the men of Judah pressed their claims even more forcefully than the men of Israel. This is not good news, because this is a foreshadowing of the problem that's going to come about here, not at the end of David's life, but at the end of Solomon, his son. And we won't get into that part of the story in this study, but basically the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel are going to divide. Judah and Benjamin will stay with Solomon's son, and the other 10 tribes, these 10 tribes here are saying, "We have 10 shares in David. Why is it that you're stealing him? Why is it that you're showing him favoritism? Isn't he even more so our king?" Those 10 tribes will move away, and they will become a different kingdom, and eventually will be lost forever to history when they are taken away by the Assyrians. But that gets far ahead of our story. We'll be wrapping up the story of David here soon, and then rather than continuing on with the story of Solomon from 1 Kings, we'll be doing a study, as I mentioned last week, on the kingdom of God is like, a series of sayings from Jesus from the New Testament. With that, we'll end this episode of the Bible Study Podcast. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment on this episode at thebiblestudypodcast.com or in the Facebook community, facebook.com/The Bible Study Podcast. You can also send me an email to host@thebiblestudypodcast.com or follow me on Twitter at Chris2X. If you happen to be in iTunes, I love 5-star reviews. Thanks so much for listening.
I'm Billy Yancey, entrepreneur, fitness cowboy, father, retired Navy cornerback, and now podcast host. Listen to my new show, Billy and the Goat, on Life Audio. Happy listening.